So our body is comprised of many different organs and glands that work together in order to perform our daily functions that are necessary for us to live. An important gland in our system is called the thyroid gland, which is located in our throat, and it's a very essential part of the endocrine system. And according to Society for Endocrinology, the thyroid gland produces thyroid hormones which help many functions such as metabolism, heart and digestive functions regulate every single day. And these hormones that the thyroid gland produces get sent throughout our bloodstream in order to regulate all those functions that I talked about, such as metabolism, heart and digestive functions, and actually many more. So what could go wrong with the thyroid gland? Now, there's many different diseases and disorders of a thyroid gland, including hyperthyroidism, which is an overactive thyroid, and hypothyroidism, which is an underactive thyroid. Now, going into more depth on hypothyroidism, what overall is hypothyroidism? So like I said, it is an underactive thyroid gland, and it's when your thyroid gland doesn't produce enough of the hormone to keep up with your daily functions. So according to Everyday Health, elevated TSH levels lead to hypothyroidism. So elevated TSH levels is when your thyroid is not producing enough, because it's telling your body to produce a certain amount of the thyroid hormone and it's not producing enough, so that's why your TSH levels are high, which means you have hypothyroidism. And according to the American Thyroid Association, symptoms of hypothyroidism include chills, fatigue, dry skin, weight gain, again due to that low metabolism because you're not metabolizing your food as if you would have if you had the right amount of thyroid hormones produced in your system, and constipation. Now, the prevalence of hypothyroidism is pretty prevalent. So if you want to look at this graph, you can see that it increases with age. So the older you get, the more chance of having hypothyroidism, and it also is more common in women than men. Now, that graph, the prevalence from that graph was from Dr. Josier Rangala, and I want to talk about the causes of hypothyroidism. So there's many different causes to hypothyroidism, but I'm just going to highlight a few of them. So the first one that I want to highlight is the autoimmune disease, and this is known as Hashimoto's. And in Hashimoto's, your autoimmune system actually attacks your thyroid gland. It perceives your thyroid gland to be an invading pathogen, and it starts to break down the thyroid gland. And when you start breaking down the thyroid gland, eventually it poops out and you don't have any more of a thyroid gland, and it cannot produce enough thyroid hormones to keep up with your system. The second one I want to talk about is the surgical removal of the thyroid gland. So due to other medical conditions, you may need to get your thyroid removed. And when you remove your thyroid, obviously you don't have a thyroid anymore, and it's not producing the thyroid hormones, which leads to the hypothyroidism. A third one I want to talk about is radiation to the thyroid. Again, for other medical conditions such as thyroid cancer, you may need to get radiation to your thyroid. Again, the radiation breaks down the thyroid gland, eventually leading it to not produce enough or not any thyroid hormones, which leads to hypothyroidism. You could also be born with hypothyroidism, which is known as congenital hypothyroidism. So something happening when you were in the womb, and you may not produce a thyroid gland, or you may only produce half a thyroid gland. Again, it cannot keep up with the daily demands of your bodily functions, and you lead to hypothyroidism. The last one I want to talk about is thyroiditis, which is the inflammation of the thyroid. And when your thyroid gets inflamed, it eventually releases all of the supply of your thyroid hormone. It drops all of it in the bloodstream. So for a second, you actually become hyperthyroid, and you have an overactive thyroid gland because it drops all of your thyroid hormone into the blood supply. But after it drops all the blood supply, it doesn't have all the thyroid hormone supply into the blood. It no longer can produce enough thyroid hormones, and it actually becomes hypothyroid. And all of those causes were from the American Thyroid Association. Now I want to talk about diagnosis and treatment, because what are you supposed to do when you have hypothyroidism? So it is diagnosed by a blood test. So they'll take your blood in the vial and they test it to see what your TSH levels are. Now if your TSH levels are high, you most likely have hypothyroidism, and if your TSH levels are low, then you have hyperthyroidism. So obviously you want to balance and you want your TSH levels to be normal. Unfortunately, hypothyroidism cannot be cured. It is treatable, but again, no cure. According to the American Thyroid Association, hypothyroidism can be treated with pills, which are synthetic thyroid hormone pills, which basically make up for what your thyroid doesn't do. So it's more added thyroid hormone into your system that your thyroid gland didn't produce. In conclusion, hypothyroidism is an underactive thyroid due to your thyroid gland not producing enough thyroid hormones. There's many different causes, including autoimmune disease, congenital hypothyroidism, inflammation of the thyroid, surgical removal of the thyroid, or radiation to the thyroid gland. Again, treatment includes synthetic thyroid hormone pills, which make up for what your thyroid gland doesn't produce enough, basically. So I'm hoping that after this speech you understand what hypothyroidism is, what are the causes, the prevalence of it, and the diagnosis and treatment.